excited. I think it's my second time being here and talking a little bit about mobile app testing. Last time was a little bit very generic. Today, I'd like to, or Galina asked me to dive a little bit more into Android and basically what kind of tools do you need to get started? How can you help your mobile teams? How can you help the developer to test mobile apps, specifically on Android? And I prepared a few slides, and I'd like to give you an overview on that and really dive into that. And the second part of our session today, I'd like you to really dive into that. I see everyone has computers in front of you, so I'm here to answer any questions, and we can do a few exercises together so that you really hands-on get some experience that you can then use on your projects that you work on. Good, so a little bit about myself. As you maybe see from my complicated last name, I'm originally from Germany, and maybe you also recognize a little bit on the accent. So I came over here to Silicon Valley 3 years ago, and initially, actually, I worked with my team on consumer apps, and we realized when we worked on consumer apps how painful it really was to really make sure that this app works across all these different devices. And it took us such a long time to really always do the whole regression testing, and we looked for better ways on how can we actually automate some of the testing. And so we stopped our consumer apps and we started a company focusing on automating app testing, and it's called testmunk. And I will show you in a moment a brief demo what is our tool about. But actually my experience in QA goes a long time back. Actually 10 years ago I was involved, or I was working as an intern for a German handset manufacturer. So today there's no German handset manufacturer anymore, but at that time there was still a company, and I was doing some QA on some that was before Android and iOS was even released. And I still remember when I was in the QA department and I pressed the wrong button, and suddenly the whole menu switched into Chinese, and then it took me like half an hour to come back to it and figuring out what actually happened. Or another scenario, the battery said 30%, and then suddenly it turned off, where it wasn't accurate. So I experienced all sorts of issues, and I realized what importance really QA has for the success of a company, and really making sure that the app that is being shipped, or the device in that sense, has to have a good quality, because else it's going to be really bad for the whole company. So what you guys are doing here, and what kind of career path you guys want to go, is really, really important for each company that you're going to work for. So before we dive into Android, I just want to briefly give you an overview. So testmunk, we basically provide cloud access to a large set of devices where you can upload your test cases and your binary file, like on Android, APK file, and iOS, an IPA file, and then over a web UI you can execute it on a large set of devices. So we have at the moment over 30 Android devices in our cloud, and iOS several others, like 15 or 20, I believe. And then it gets executed, and while it's being executed, you see on your web UI, you see screenshots, you see device logs. So that makes it really easy for you to identify issues and report that back to the company and to the developer. So what are the goals of today? I'd like to dive into getting started on Android QA. What do you actually need? What kind of tools? What kind of software? What kind of setup you should really have in place? But also a little bit of better understanding about the language that the developer speaks, because you will directly interact with the developer, and having some understanding when he mentions certain things, what it actually is going to be really good for you guys to have an effective work relationship there in the team. And also overall, there are a lot of really helpful tools and methods that you can use to have a faster bug replication and investigation. Because sometimes, as you know, it can be really frustrating to find a certain bug where the developer asks you like, hey, how did you trigger that? And so there can be some back and forth, and there's some really helpful things that you can use for yourself of really having this information way quicker and actually impress the whole team about it. So first of all, I want to dive into some like common bugs on mobile, especially on Android, and I prepared a little report from one of our clients where I would show you some of the issues they had in terms of their releases and what kind of common bugs you will see when you work on Android apps. So what tools you need, I will dive into the Android SDK and talk a lot about ADB, a little bit about Android device logs, but as well what kind of tools does the developer actually use? So how does he build the app, and how can you run it on the simulator or emulator on Android? And last but not least, I have a little sample app, basically Android source code, and we can actually run that in the emulator, and you can use that, it's open source, you can use that to experiment yourself and really install it on your device and do some exercises with it. Good. As you see, like there are a lot of like issues and challenges in the testing world for mobile, and in the following I'm gonna show a few examples where that's actually a client app where I want to briefly walk you, I think, 5 issues that, let's say, before they launched the app, they discovered, and basically QA department was able to detect it and report that back to the developer. One of them was actually surprising that the company identified a lot of issues around backend. Usually if you do like, let's say, automated UI testing or acceptance tests, you would expect like a lot of issues that are more like related to the mobile client. But actually, very often the mobile QA guy got back to the backend team where maybe certain APIs changed or a certain logic on the backend, and then what was the result? Okay, the front end doesn't show things. In that case, bad gateway errors, for example, and the backend team was really like surprised that suddenly like, okay, their own team or their own tests didn't catch that, but actually then the QA came back to them and helped them to identify that. I think a lot, I heard like user experience, especially on mobile, where you know it yourself. You're not gonna wait like 10, 20 seconds until like something is loaded. You're basically just like killing the app, or if that happens a couple of times, it might actually be the case that you uninstall the app. And so thinking about what, and when you, let's say, are working on a mobile project, asking a little bit like the supervisor, okay, what is our definition of like a good user experience? Is it like, do we want to wait 5 seconds or is it 10 seconds? Where do we set like the quality, and based also on what network? So, because if you have like if you're on Wi-Fi, and it already takes like 10 seconds, don't even ask like on a bad connection, like might take forever. And these are certain, let's say, things where you can really bring something to the table if you like really ask like, okay, what is our standard? What is our definition of good? Because many people really don't think about these things like, okay, from the user experience point of view. Also, very often I heard like buttons were not there. Someone mentioned that. So really on mobile, especially on Android, we have so many different devices and so many different manufacturers, and we have now the latest lollipop, or Android M was just announced like last week. So there are a lot of challenges for the developer, and often the developer might just test on one device, plug it in, and then but their tablets, they're like, I think 10 different, how many Android manufacturers are out there? I think over like 50. There's some like manufacturers in India and China we've never heard about. But anyhow, even on iOS here, you actually see there's a big difference between, let's say, non-Retina and Retina display, where like certain icons were there and not. Also, typically I heard about crashes. But also, especially on Android, is also if you have smaller screen devices where like certain buttons are covered with the keyboard or just not there. And that is just then a bad user experience, especially for not so experienced users. Because I mean, like we're pretty young, we're like used to like a lot of apps, but just imagine like your parents, or if you're the project that you're working on is targeting a little bit like an older age group, or more like enterprise apps where you suddenly have to deal with users that are like 50 maybe, or 60 even, and so the person might just stop using the app, and then that has an impact on revenue and everything. Okay, now I want to dive with you more into Android. So what do we actually need to QA an Android app? Some of these things are really obvious, but I just felt like, okay, to give you an overview. Okay, what do we need? Like the app that you have on your phone, who's an Android user here? Okay, so that's like 30–40%? Yeah. Okay, who's on Windows? Okay. Okay, and who's on BlackBerry? What else do we have? iOS? Okay, so I guess iOS is probably like 50%. Okay. Okay, so basically the app that you have on your screen is called an APK file. It's Android Package Kit. That's essentially the app. On iOS, it's called IPA file. And yeah, what else do you need? You need, of course, a phone, and you need a cable to connect it to the computer. The good part about, let's say, Android in terms of testing is you can use Windows as well as your Mac, or Linux works as well. Apple is a little bit more restricted. So for, let's say, if you want to develop iOS apps, you actually need a Mac. So they want you to buy a Mac. Okay, we need to have the Android SDK installed. I'll show you in a bit how that works. And let's say, okay, it's nice to have the access to the source code, but actually in terms of testing, you don't need the source code. So what is the Android SDK? The Android SDK you can download from the Google website, which basically gives you sample projects. It gives you all the development tools that you actually need to like really develop Android apps, but as well like the emulator to run it on the computer, and certain debug capabilities as well. And that's available on the Google website. So what is ADB? ADB is called Android Debug Bridge, and basically what we're gonna do is we have a computer and we have a device with our Android app, and we want that the app on the device talks to the computer, or that you actually can interact with the app. And for doing that, there's something called ADB that basically interacts and connects these both. And that's how you get like certain information about, or basically first you start with installing the app, and I will show in a bit how that works. Okay, I basically already mentioned that. So the easiest way of really getting started in terms of installing ADB is if you download Android Studio. Android Studio is the IDE, so the way how the developer codes an Android app, and then it comes out of the box, but you can also install it like independently, and then you already have ADB. So we have that. Now, important on Android, in order to let's say interact with the device, you have to enable debug mode. Debug mode, basically you have to go to the settings, and you have to make sure that you go to developer options. Sometimes, or usually, these developer options are not there. Then you have to scroll completely to the bottom, and usually there's a I think there's an information about the OS version, and you have to tap it like 6 or 7 times. So it's a little bit hidden. But basically, if you Google your Android device and you say enable debug mode, let's say Samsung S5, then you get certain information. I think with the latest one, you just have to tap like 7 times on the OS version, and then it says like developer mode enabled. So it's a little hidden. On iOS, it's a little bit easier, where you just go onto settings and you enable it there. I think it's UI automation, as it's called. Also helpful, so then basically US debugging should be enabled, and if you plug it in, you will also see a certain notification on the screen. Also helpful when you do certain, in terms of especially automation, that you that you make sure the screen is awake, so that it's on. Because if you interact with screenshots, if the screen is off, you would just see a black screen, and that's not gonna helpful. Just don't forget it to turn it off, or disable it afterwards, because else your battery will drain pretty quickly. Yeah, here it is. Also tap on the build number about 7 times. I have it here. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, I will plug in here like my Android phone here. It's actually I'm an iOS user, but you know, I like Android too. So what we're gonna do is, I will plug in my phone, and we're gonna I'm gonna walk you through a few ADB commands. The ones that have an Android phone actually with you, feel free to do it at the same time, and you already get a little exercise. So I'm not sure if you guys already installed like Android Studio, or who already installed some Android Studio or something. Okay, so maybe I suggest the following. Maybe just listen. We do it later together. I think that's probably more effective. So just watch at this moment. Maybe take some notes. I'm also gonna share the presentation with you afterwards. I'm gonna upload it, so you will have it on hand. So what I have now here is, of course, my Mac. I have an Android phone, and it's plugged in. So what I already did is I installed Android Studio, and now we just want to make sure that the very first step is, do you see my, okay, it's my terminal. Do you guys know like how to open a terminal? Have you already interacted with terminal? Yeah, some of them. Okay, some of you guys. So basically, you can just on Mac you type in terminal, and then you can open it, so then it opens the terminal window in that sense. What I do is now the very first step, we want to make sure that actually the device is being recognized. The command for that is, do you guys see it in the back? I'll make it a little larger. It's called ADB devices. And here you see a list of devices attached, and then you see here the UDID number. So that's, or let's say the serial number of the device. Because if you're not gonna see a serial number there by executing ADB devices, that means you can basically not interact with the device. So the device is not being recognized. And that means you can't use ADB at all. So, and that can be pretty frustrating to figure out what's actually wrong. A few tips here, because that somehow happens, I would say pretty regularly, that ADB devices doesn't show any device. That actually just happened to me like before I got here. I tried it out if everything works, and then like didn't work, of course. So one thing is like to unplug the phone, plug it in again. I already had cases where actually the cable somehow got corrupt and didn't work anymore. So I recommend like you should have like 2 or 3 cables. And actually don't order the cheapest on Amazon or something. They're more likely to break. I think in our cloud setup we have like some of the most expensive ones, but they seem to work better than others. We definitely have a lot of them. So what else? You can also say ADB kill -server as a command, or ADB start kill. Hold on, what is it? Start server, of course. ADB start server. Okay, so in our case, set up ADB devices. Okay, it's there. Awesome. Good. Now, what I'd like to do with you guys is let's install an app on the device. So here I have an app. It's called app-debug.apk. Also important to know, if you have that app already installed, that doesn't, so yeah, you have to first delete it. I'm gonna do that now. Uninstall. Okay. So if I do here adb install, and now I specify the location of the app. So the way how I do it here on Mac is I just simply drag it in. So I drag just basically the app where it's in here, and then you see directly the whole path to the file. And now I see, I just clicked enter, and now success. And well, only the guys here in the front see it. It's basically this app here, and it's installed. So that's very easy. So let's say whenever you get like an Android file, APK file, you just have to make sure ADB works, execute ADB install to the path name, and then it's on the phone.
That's simple for the PC as for Mac.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what comments for the Mac?
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, okay. So it's on there. Good. What else? Of course, I can uninstall it with ADB. That works as well. Okay, now a few cool things that I want to show you guys. So if I execute ddms, then suddenly this new window pops up. That's basically the debug monitor, where I get more information about, first of all, the logcat information, so actually what's happening on the device. And if I do certain things here, you see, here it says inactive, input. So actually I see the whole device log, what's happening. And that's very much, when it comes to investigating, or if there was a crash or something important. You see threads, you see some memory information, network, so a few information there that can help you. So I killed it. Another really nice, hold on, I just have to check that I'm, okay. Hold on, we'll come to that in a moment. Okay, so ADB also has certain ways of recording a video. So if you do certain actions on it, you can actually record it. You can take a screenshot, and there are various other commands available, such as you can reboot the device. So I'm not going now through all the commands. It's basically easiest you search for just ADB Android commands on Google, and you will find a whole list. And feel free to just experiment around it, what's possible. You're not gonna hurt your phone in that sense. Who has already been dealing with like device logs on Android? Okay, one person. Okay, two, a little bit. Okay, so what I'm gonna show you here is it's probably one of the most common or most used commands. If you say adb logcat -d, so that's basically just the device log that we just executed, or from the previous clean to what I just did. So if I say adb logcat -c, then I actually just killed or basically cleaned the log. Okay, hold on. Yeah. We'll move that a little bit. So, hold on. So adb logcat -d, and -c is to basically clear it. So if I logcat. Okay. okay, sorry, -c, okay. So what I just did is here, I said logcat -c is, I basically cleared it. So let's say a fresh start in that sense, because if you don't clear it, there might be a lot of like historical info that you actually don't want. So therefore I executed logcat -c, and with -d, then I checked and it's basically empty. And now I could do some actions here on the phone, and let's quickly do that, a few here. And if I now, okay, now you see I just executed some actions on the screen. I did -d again, and then based on my actions, I see the logcat here. Okay. That's actually an example from one of our clients where there was a crash on one device, and then they found out with the device log what actually is wrong. So this is really, really valuable information where the developer will ask you, hey, or if you directly provide him the device log, like he will be like so thankful, like he will probably invite you for a beer or something. Good. So of course there's also a way how you can directly save it in a file. So if you say, basically specify, here you see it where you want to save the file, and say like, okay, device log.txt, you can directly do that. Okay, now I should have on my desktop, I should have, here you see it, device log -text. That's then the file that you want to upload to your bug reporting tool, and then the developer has the information that he needs. I want to just briefly talk about the manifest file. The manifest file is a file within this APK, basically, that defines various things. And I just want you to, at least one time that you heard about it, and I will actually show you what's defined there. Because once in a while there can be, let's say, some information that the developer has to add to the manifest file, or where, let's say, if you do some automation where maybe the app couldn't get launched. And so if you already heard about it, you will maybe then at some point remember it. And let me open it and show you briefly. Okay, so that's, by the way, Android Studio in that sense. And here's my app folder in that sense, so where everything related to this Android application is in there. So all the Java code and so on is in there. But as well, you see here manifests, Android manifest XML, that's this file here. And in this file, you specify certain user permissions, so that the app has access to the internet, but as well you can define that this app is like debug app file, where you have some more capabilities to interact with the app, or if it's a release version. So all of these things can be basically defined in this Android manifest file. And there might be something that you need for automation, or something that maybe it's not in there, and then the developer can basically, by modifying this file, can give you more, let's say, rights in that sense. So it's just something to remember, that this is quite an important file. You also can specify minimum, or the developer basically does that. He can say like, okay, minimum SDK version and the targeted SDK version. So what is the lowest Android version that you guys are going to support in that sense? That's specified here. Okay. So next, UI Automator Viewer. It's actually a very handy tool, and it's relatively easy to use. Sometimes let's say the developer might ask you, okay, yeah, what kind of button are you talking about, or what exactly do you mean? And I'm gonna show you how you can give like really precise information back to the team. And also, the UI Automator Viewer is part of the Android SDK. So again, what I'm doing is I'm opening my terminal, and by simply executing UI Automator Viewer, okay, hold on. I start my phone again here. Okay, again, magic, like a new window opens. So what's happening here? I click on this little phone icon here, and now we see a screenshot of my device here. So of course you can now, if you want, like you can take a screenshot here or save that, but even better, you actually get precise information of the whole view hierarchy. So I'm going here over it with the mouse, and you see on the right side how it's changing. So let me make that a little larger here. And I will go back. So now I just changed the view. Unfortunately, the UI Automator Viewer doesn't automatically update, so you have to click again the button on the top left, and then you get basically the new screenshot. So now it's set up. So for example, this one here, click me, that's button 1. Here you see button 2. So ignore that here, that's a package name, but here that's what we care about here, button 2. Or that's the text field, edit text 1. Something to mention here, one thing what we often tell our clients, our clients who want to get started with automation is, button 1 is a very generic name. And so better way would be actually saying, okay, here's a label, click me. So actually this should be like click me button. That makes it just easier for you later when you write automated tests to actually know like, hey, what kind of button is it? Because if you then just have in your test script like button 1, it's like gonna be pretty hard. Also something to mention here, most likely, let's say you join a mobile project, there will be also an iOS app. And here on Android, these labels are called resource ID. On iOS, it's called accessibility labels. So it's more or less the same, it's just a different name in that sense. But what you actually want to make sure, because like the company, usually when they have an Android app, they also have an iOS app. And so what you want to really push for, that these labels are actually the same, in case like the iOS and the Android app are the same, that these are the same names. That makes it just easier later in terms of automation. So that's something maybe, let's say when the project is at the beginning phase, that's something that you can raise or mention. Because ultimately, maybe later or sometime else, I can mention a little bit cross-platform testing, where you actually can execute like the same test case on both platforms, and that makes it just way easier if you already have these labels in place with the same name. Okay. So how are Android apps actually being coded? And so the UI that you just saw here, that's Android Studio, it's actually from Google, based on IntelliJ. It's the most common IDE. Others that you most likely have heard about, Eclipse. Eclipse is used for various coding languages. It's also open source. And IntelliJ. So these are basically the three on the market in that sense. Well, there are a few others, but these are the most common ones. Android Studio is actually it seems like the most popular on the market. And here's some of the screenshots. Like Android Studio looks like that. IntelliJ looks a little bit different. So it's a little bit, to say like what's the best. It really depends a little bit to the developers. One developer likes one IDE more, the other likes the other more. It's hard to say that there's the best. just briefly to mention a little bit in terms of test automation, some of the frameworks that are out there. So there you have like Calabash or Appium that are available both on iOS and Android, so you can leverage certain cross-platform capabilities. These are open source. Robotium is already a little bit older. There you have to write the test in Java. UI Automator is one from Google. Is relatively new, so therefore you cannot test like older Android versions and doesn't support web views. And Espresso is another one, Java. We're not gonna dive into that right now, but I just want you to already heard about it, what's out there in terms of like automation, what are some of the frameworks. We at testmunk work with Calabash and have like really good experience there, and it's very powerful. So some of the good to knows, definitely mobile test automation is becoming more and more popular, especially because of the device fragmentation where you quickly want to execute the test on a large set of devices, and especially some more of the repetitive manual testing. There are some really nice ways of automating that. Also, I believe one trend that we're seeing is there are a few things like performance testing, automation, but also user experience. We just talked about some buttons not available or not being seen on smaller screen devices. So especially on mobile, like the whole user experience is so important. And there are like statistics on like how many clicks or like how many taps do you need to buy something on the mobile phone or take a picture. If you look at Instagram or Snapchat, these are like some trends, especially among the younger generation, where you want to have with like least clicks as possible. You want to come to the result, and kind of the success of these apps like Snapchat and Instagram speak for themselves. So having a really good user experience and having it really intuitive is becoming, like in the whole QA area, more and more important. So it's not just like, okay, we bang on the screen and we want to find like a bug or crash or something. It's actually like bringing a lot about, okay, is that a good user experience? Like, is that intuitive for the users? Does the user know what he actually should do? There's also a big trend and that actually supports it is A/B testing, where you actually test like, okay, are more people gonna buy if the button is green or red? So and this all goes into that area of really making sure that the user has a really good experience, and that's something where I believe that you should really, like, let's say, watch out and like when you use apps in your daily life, think a little bit like, okay, is that intuitive or is that not really intuitive, and why is it not? Like, I think you can train yourself like certain like new skills in that area if you don't have them yet. Also really interesting, and I think that makes like the QA job really, really exciting, because basically you have the whole overview on this one side, like the developer, what kind of feature he worked on, what's coming next, but as well as on the business side, why are certain things important, and you see like, okay, what are users saying, what are they complaining? Very often like QA people are monitoring the app reviews. You see kind of what people use the most. You might have access to certain analytics where you see like, where users are dropping off, and you basically get this whole picture, and that makes it really exciting to have like the whole overview and being involved in like the success of the app. And usually, many companies, are a little bit like in their own, like, let's say each department, like the developers just see the development work, and then the business people just see like the revenue side, and kind of you guys can kind of connect all and everyone, and that's really exciting. So some common questions that I hear once in a while: can I run an APK both on emulator and actually, there's a mistake. It should be device. Yes. Yeah, you can use the APK for both the emulator and the device. It's different on iOS, where actually this app file you have to build specifically for the simulator. So it's kind of a little bit confusing. Emulator, like the term is used on Android. On iOS, they say like simulator, because you know, it would be like else one is copying from the other, so they kind of want to be different. But actually on iOS, if you want to run it in a simulator, so simulator I mean like the let's say the you know, virtual environment that you run on your computer, but not on a device. That just to be clear. So you have to specifically build one for the simulator and specifically for the device, because actually, you know, I already heard scenarios where, and I've done the mistake myself, where like I received like a IPA file that was built for the simulator, but I tried to install it on the device, and of course it doesn't work. And I think you can spend like an hour like trying to figure out why it doesn't work, and then you figure out like, okay, did I maybe receive the wrong one? Very often people are asking like, okay, what can be automated? You know, it really depends a little bit. I would say certain averages that I have seen that are possible, definitely like 30 to 50%. One of our clients, we even automated like 65%. It really depends a little bit, what does the app do, and you know, sometimes certain scenarios are a little bit harder to automate than maybe you stick with manual testing. It really depends. Sometimes, you know, or let's say one of the concerns sometimes in terms of automation is, okay, what do we do if the UI is changing? You have to kind of, you know, maintain the tests. So there are a few like ways how you can keep the maintenance low. There are some frameworks like Page Object Framework that we commonly use to implement large-scale test suites, where you just change the code at one point, and then let's say your login process changes, you change it at one point, and then it's relevant for everything. What are some of your questions? None yet? Okay. Maybe later. So where do I get started? I have here the link to a sample Android app and source code. It's on GitHub, open source, you can just download it. It's actually the app that I just shared with you guys. We have a blog on blog.testmunk.com where almost every week we have a new content piece. So we mentioned something like getting started with mobile test automation, like really like beginner guide. We covered some of the things like moving from manual testing to automated testing, Page Object Framework. We have like a big tutorial, and many other things. Good. I would say maybe we do a break, and afterwards we do some things together in terms of getting Android Studio up and running, and I'm here to help, I would say. Good. Well, thank you.